You know, I'm not going to, we have a G20 meeting in South Africa. South Africa shouldn't even be in the Gs anymore.
President Donald Trump made a statement to the effect that South Africa would not be invited to participate in the G20 in the United States.
Two nations on opposite sides of the globe are locked in one of the most intense diplomatic clashes of modern times. What began as quiet geopolitical friction has erupted into full-blown political and economic warfare between the United States and South Africa. Between summit boycotts, 30% trade tariffs, clashes over international courts, and explosive accusations of genocide, relations between Washington and Pretoria have reached an all-time low. At the center of this storm are two leaders with diametrically opposed worldviews, Donald Trump and Cyril Ramaphosa. But how did two historic trading partners reach this point? And what does this escalating standoff mean for the future of global alliances? The tipping point began with the recent Group of 20 summit in Johannesburg. As leaders from the world's largest economies gathered in South Africa to discuss global finance and development, one seat remained conspicuously empty. The United States boycotted the event entirely. Skipping the summit was a dramatic move, but what followed sent shockwaves through international diplomatic circles. Shortly after the boycott, Donald Trump announced plans to host the next G20 summit at his private golf club in Miami, Florida. In the same breath, he issued a direct warning. South Africa would not be invited. For South Africa, this was seen as a direct challenge to its sovereignty and international standing. South Africa is not an observer or a temporary guest. It is a founding member of the G20 and the only African nation with a permanent seat at the table. President Cyril Ramaphosa responded with a sharp and uncompromising televised address to the nation. He rejected the American threats, asserting that South Africa holds its G20 seat in its own right and name, and that no single country has the unilateral power to strip a founding member of its status. Ramaphosa emphasized that his administration remains open to dialogue, but made it clear that Pretoria would not be intimidated or pushed out of global forums. To understand why the White House took such an aggressive stance, you have to look at the deeply polarizing narratives driving American policy toward South Africa. One of the main justifications cited by the US administration revolves around allegations of a so-called white genocide and claims of widespread illegal land seizures targeting white Afrikaner farmers. These claims, amplified heavily across right-wing media outlets and digital forums, suggest that the South African government is orchestrating or turning a blind eye to targeted violence against the country's white minority. President Ramaphosa met these allegations head-on, dismissing them as completely false and describing them as part of a coordinated disinformation campaign. According to Ramaphosa, certain interest groups both inside South Africa and in the United States are actively lobbying foreign governments with fabricated narratives. He warned that this disinformation is causing tangible damage to South Africa's national interests, threatening domestic jobs and poisoning ties with critical economic partners. While land reform remains one of South Africa's most sensitive domestic issues, driven by efforts to redress the brutal legacy of apartheid, where the black majority was systematically stripped of land, international watchdogs and legal experts have consistently pointed out that the genocide claims lack factual grounding. Nevertheless, the narrative found strong traction in Washington, serving as political justification for aggressive foreign policy maneuvers. The tension has moved far beyond diplomatic rhetoric and into concrete economic warfare. Following his return to office, Donald Trump placed South Africa directly in his economic sights by imposing sweeping 30% tariffs on South African imports. These tariffs strike a heavy blow against South African industries, from automotive manufacturing to agriculture and mineral exports. Furthermore, the prospect of any new bilateral trade agreements or tariff relief has been completely taken off the table. Washington has also expressed deep frustration with South Africa's internal economic policies, particularly the Black Economic Empowerment laws, enacted to bring historically disadvantaged citizens into the mainstream economy following decades of racial segregation. These laws are viewed by Pretoria as vital for long-term stability and economic justice. However, critics in the US administration argue that these policies are reverse discrimination, turning an internal legislative framework into an international grievance. While domestic issues have created friction, foreign policy has pushed the relationship to the breaking point. The biggest catalyst for the current breakdown is South Africa's stance on the conflict in the Middle East. South Africa made global headlines by dragging Israel, one of Washington's closest and most strategic allies, to the International Court of Justice in The Hague, accusing it of committing genocide in Gaza. This bold legal challenge placed Pretoria directly in the crosshairs of American foreign policy. Even as international talks surrounding ceasefires progressed, South Africa reaffirmed that it will continue pursuing its case at The Hague. This ideological split was on full display during a tense meeting at the White House between Trump and Ramaphosa. Instead of bridging the divide, the meeting only highlighted the deep chasm between Washington's traditional alliances and South Africa's independent, non-aligned foreign policy posture. This brings us to a crucial question. Can the United States actually ban South Africa from attending the upcoming G20 summit in Miami? Strictly speaking, the rules of international diplomacy say no. The G20 operates on consensus among all member states. The host country does not possess the legal power within the G20 Charter to unilaterally expel or disinvite another permanent member without the collective agreement of the entire bloc. However, practical reality tells a different story. As the host nation, the United States exercises complete sovereign control over its borders and airspace. Political commentators point out that the US government could simply deny entry visas to the South African delegation, refuse landing clearance for official government aircraft, or create insurmountable bureaucratic hurdles. Through border authority alone, Washington has the practical leverage to lock South African diplomats out of the room. For South Africa, retaliation options are limited. The country lacks the military and economic clout to counter American tariffs or diplomatic maneuvers blow for blow. Instead, Pretoria's strategy relies on international law, rallying support among other G20 members and emerging economies in the global south, and standing firm on its founding status. What is unfolding between the United States and South Africa is far more than a personal feud between two leaders. It is a defining clash over national sovereignty. The influence of online narratives on high-stakes foreign policy, and the shifting power dynamics of a multipolar world. As trade penalties mount and summit deadlines approach, both nations stand at a critical crossroads. Whether diplomacy will prevail or relations will deteriorate further remains one of the most critical geopolitical stories to watch. Leave your thoughts in the comments below on how you see this standoff unfolding, and make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for more in-depth geopolitical coverage.